Most people think the forest is silent. They imagine tall trees, fresh air, and a place where nothing happens. But anyone who has spent a night alone in the wilderness knows something different. The forest is never truly quiet. There are always sounds: branches moving, animals walking through leaves, the wind changing direction. But sometimes you hear something that doesn't belong, something that makes you realize you are not alone. This happened to Alex during a solo camping trip in a remote forest area. Alex had always enjoyed being outdoors. Unlike many people who went camping once or twice a year, he had been doing it for almost a decade. He knew how to start a fire. He knew how to read a map. He knew the importance of preparation. Before every trip, he followed the same routine. He checked the weather, downloaded offline maps, packed extra food and water, told someone exactly where he was going. He wasn't looking for danger. He was looking for peace. After months of working long hours, Alex decided he needed a break. He wanted to spend a few days somewhere far away from phones, traffic, and people. He chose a forest area several hours away from the nearest town. It wasn't a famous camping location. There were no large campsites, no cabins, no tourist attractions, just a massive stretch of wilderness. The kind of place where you could walk for hours and never see another person. When Alex arrived, the area looked perfect. The weather was clear. The temperature was comfortable. Birds were moving through the trees. A small stream ran nearby. He found a good location and started setting up his campsite. Everything felt normal. Almost too normal. After setting up his tent, Alex spent the afternoon exploring the area. He followed a small trail, took pictures, collected firewood. Nothing seemed unusual. But while walking back to camp before sunset, he noticed something. A second trail. It wasn't marked on his map. It was old and almost hidden. The path disappeared between thick trees. Alex thought about following it, but he decided not to. He didn't know where it went, and he didn't want to lose daylight. That night, Alex cooked dinner beside the fire. The forest around him was completely dark. The kind of darkness you don't experience in cities. No streetlights, no buildings in the distance, only trees. After putting out the fire, Alex entered his tent and tried to sleep. For the first few hours, everything was normal. Then, around 1:30 a.m., he woke up. He didn't know why. There was no loud noise, no sudden movement, just a feeling. The feeling that something had changed. He opened his eyes and listened. At first, he heard nothing. Then, a sound. Crunch. A footstep. Alex immediately became alert. He waited. Another sound. Crunch. Another step. Something was moving outside. At first, he thought it was an animal. Maybe a deer. Maybe something searching for food. But then, the footsteps stopped. Right outside his tent. Alex stayed completely still. Seconds passed. Then he heard another step. Not 4 legs. 2. A person. Someone was walking around his tent. Slowly, carefully. Alex reached for his flashlight, but he didn't turn it on. Something told him not to reveal where he was inside the tent. The footsteps moved. From the front of the tent, to the side, then behind him, then back again. Whoever was outside wasn't passing by. They were studying the campsite. After several minutes, Alex heard something that made his entire body freeze. A hand touched the outside of the tent, not opening it, just touching the fabric. A slow movement, like someone was checking if he was awake.
Alex held his breath. He wanted to shout. He wanted to scare whoever was outside away. But he couldn't, because he didn't know who was standing there. The hand disappeared. The footsteps moved away. Then silence. Complete silence. Alex stayed awake for the rest of the night. He didn't move. He didn't check outside. He waited until the first sunlight appeared. When morning came, he slowly opened the tent. The campsite looked normal. Almost. Until he saw the ground. There were footprints everywhere. Around the tent. Around the fire area. Around his backpack.
Someone had walked around his campsite for hours. But the strangest part was where the footprints stopped. They ended at the tree line. Like whoever was there simply vanished. Alex packed his things immediately. He didn't even make breakfast. He just wanted to leave. On his way back, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The hidden trail from the previous day. There were footprints on it. Fresh footprints, leading deeper into the forest. Alex followed them with his eyes. Then he noticed something hanging from a tree, a small piece of torn fabric. It looked like part of a jacket. He took a picture and continued walking. When he reached his car, he finally felt safe. Later that day, he contacted a local ranger. He explained what happened. The ranger asked several questions, then asked, "Did you see anyone?" Alex said no. The ranger stayed quiet. Then he asked, "Did you hear them leave?" Alex thought about it and realized something. No. He never heard the person walk away. The footprints simply stopped. The ranger told him something disturbing. Other campers had reported similar things in that area. Not attacks. Not robberies. Just strange encounters. People hearing footsteps around their tents. People finding footprints with no explanation. People feeling like someone was watching them from the trees. The ranger told Alex that some parts of the forest were rarely visited. There were old abandoned trails. Old hunting areas. Places people hadn't explored in years. Alex asked if someone could have been living out there. The ranger said it was possible, but then he added, "Living out there doesn't explain everything people have reported." Years later, Alex still goes camping, but he follows one rule now. He never camps where he cannot see another campsite nearby. Because the thing that scares him most isn't that someone was outside his tent. It's the possibility that whoever was there had been watching him long before he woke up. Story 2. The Forest Trail That Wasn't Supposed to Exist. Most people who hike through forests believe that trails are created for a reason. Someone walked there before. Someone marked the way. Someone knew where the path led. But sometimes, deep in the wilderness, people discover trails that don't appear on any map. Paths that shouldn't be there. And for some hikers, following those paths becomes the biggest mistake they ever make. This happened to Ryan during a hiking trip through a remote forest area. Ryan had always loved exploring places that most people ignored. He wasn't searching for danger. He simply enjoyed discovering quiet locations away from crowded tourist areas. He preferred old forests, forgotten trails, and places where he could spend hours without seeing another person. Before every trip, Ryan prepared carefully. He studied maps, checked weather conditions, downloaded offline navigation tools. He wasn't someone who walked into the wilderness without a plan. That was why what happened to him confused him for years. Because the trail he found wasn't something he missed. It wasn't a mistake. It simply wasn't supposed to exist. The trip started on a cold autumn morning. The forest was covered with orange and yellow leaves. The air was calm. The sky was clear. Ryan parked his car near an official hiking area and started following the marked trail. For the first few hours, everything was normal. He passed other hikers, stopped to take pictures, enjoyed the scenery. Eventually, he reached a part of the forest where the trail became quieter. The other hikers disappeared. The sounds of people were replaced by wind moving through the trees. Ryan didn't mind. That was exactly what he wanted. A few hours into the hike, he noticed something strange. A small opening between the trees. A narrow path leading away from the main trail. At first, he ignored it. It looked old, overgrown, almost forgotten. But something caught his attention. There were footprints. Fresh footprints. Someone had recently walked there. Ryan checked his map. There was no trail marked in that location. No shortcut, no secondary route, nothing. He stood there for a few minutes deciding whether to continue. Eventually, curiosity won. He followed the path. At first, it seemed normal. The trail was narrow but easy to walk. Trees surrounded him on both sides. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. After about 20 minutes, Ryan noticed something unusual. The forest felt different. Not dangerous, just different. The birds had stopped making noise. There were no insects, no movement, only silence. Then he noticed something on a tree. A small piece of white fabric tied around a branch. A marker. Someone had placed it there. Ryan thought maybe it was an old hiking route. Maybe the map was outdated. He continued. The trail became clearer, which was strange. A path that hadn't appeared on any map shouldn't become easier to follow. But someone had been maintaining it. Branches were moved. Plants were cut away. Someone was using this trail. Eventually, Ryan reached a small clearing. And in the middle of the clearing was an abandoned cabin. The cabin looked old. The wood was damaged. The windows were broken. But something about it felt wrong. It wasn't completely abandoned. There was a chair outside, a stack of firewood, and a small lantern hanging beside the door. Ryan didn't enter. He stood there, looking at the cabin, trying to understand why something like this wasn't marked anywhere. He took pictures. Then he noticed something near the entrance. A notebook. It was lying on the ground. The pages were damaged by weather. Ryan opened it. Most of the writing was difficult to read, but some pages were clear. They contained dates, names, and short notes. At first, Ryan assumed it was a visitor log, until he saw something strange. The names weren't written by different people. They all had the same handwriting, and the latest entry was only a few days old. The note said, "Someone found the trail again." Ryan immediately felt uncomfortable. He looked around the clearing. For the first time, he realized something. He had no idea how far he had walked, and he had no idea how to get back. He quickly returned to the trail. But after walking for several minutes, something felt wrong. The path looked different. The trees didn't look familiar. The white markers were gone. Ryan checked his phone. No signal. The GPS couldn't locate him. He tried to remember his direction, but everything looked the same. The forest had completely changed. For the next hour, Ryan searched for the original trail. Then, just before sunset, he heard something. A voice. Someone calling from far away. "Hello?" Ryan stopped. Someone was nearby. He called back. "Hello?" The voice answered. But something was wrong. It wasn't coming closer. It sounded like it was moving away. Ryan followed the sound, which was a mistake, because the deeper he went,
the less familiar the forest became. Eventually, he found something between the trees. Another marker. Another piece of white fabric. But this one had writing on it. 3 words. Do not follow. Ryan froze. He immediately turned around. He stopped chasing the voice.
Instead, he focused on finding his way back. Hours later, after walking in what felt like circles, he finally reached the official trail. He didn't know how. He didn't know how long he had been lost, but he was finally out. When he returned home, Ryan researched the area. He discovered something disturbing. Years earlier, there had been an old logging settlement in that forest, a small community that disappeared after a series of accidents. The cabin he found wasn't supposed to be there anymore. It had been removed from the official records. The trail leading to it had been closed decades ago. But the strangest discovery came when Ryan looked through old photographs. One picture showed the abandoned settlement, and in the background was the same cabin, the same clearing, the same trail marker. But standing beside the cabin was someone, a person looking directly at the camera. Ryan recognized the clothing. It matched the description of the person whose name appeared last in the notebook, someone who had disappeared decades earlier. Ryan never returned to that forest. He still hikes, but he follows one rule. He never follows a trail that doesn't appear on a map, because he believes some paths are forgotten for a reason, and some places aren't lost. They are hidden. Story 3. The lights between the trees. There is something unsettling about seeing a light in the middle of a forest. A light means someone is there. A house. A campsite.
Another person. And when you are deep in the wilderness, far away from roads and towns, finding another person should feel comforting. But sometimes it is the exact opposite. This happened to Michael during a weekend hiking trip. Michael had always enjoyed exploring remote places. Unlike crowded national parks with thousands of visitors, he preferred areas where he could experience nature without distractions. His goal was simple: spend 2 nights alone in the forest, disconnect from everything, take some pictures, clear his mind. He chose an area known for its dense forest and difficult terrain. It wasn't a dangerous place. Many people hiked there during the day, but very few stayed overnight. The reason was simple. There were no official campsites, no facilities, no nearby buildings, just wilderness. Michael arrived in the afternoon. He parked his vehicle near an old forest road and started hiking. The first few hours were peaceful. The weather was perfect. The trail was quiet. He took pictures of the trees, the mountains, and the landscape. As the sun started disappearing, he found a good place to set up his tent. The location was surrounded by trees, but there was an open area where he could safely build a small fire. Everything felt normal, until darkness arrived. The forest changed completely at night. During the day, the trees looked beautiful. At night, they looked endless. Every sound seemed louder. Every movement seemed closer. Michael sat near the fire for a while before going to sleep. Around 11 p.m., he noticed something strange. A light, far away between the trees. At first, he thought it was another camper. Maybe someone had a flashlight. Maybe there was a hidden campsite nearby. The light appeared again, then disappeared. A few seconds later, it appeared in a different location. Michael found that strange. The distance between the 2 points was impossible, unless someone was moving extremely fast through the forest. He decided not to investigate. He turned off his flashlight and went inside his tent. But about an hour later, the light appeared again, this time much closer. Michael looked through the small opening of his tent. Between the trees, he could see a faint glow. It wasn't bright like a flashlight. It looked older, almost like a lantern. He stayed still. Then he noticed something else. There was no sound, no footsteps, no branches breaking, nothing. A person carrying a light through a forest should make noise, but whoever was holding that light moved silently. Michael tried convincing himself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the person was on a trail. Maybe the sound was blocked by the wind. Maybe he was tired. Then the light disappeared. For a few minutes, everything was quiet, until he heard a voice. A man's voice, coming from the darkness. "Hello?" Michael froze. The voice wasn't shouting. It sounded calm, like someone looking for another person. Michael considered answering, but something stopped him. The voice came from the exact direction where the light had been. He stayed silent. A few seconds passed. Then the voice said, "I know you're there." Michael's entire body went cold. He never told anyone where exactly he had set up camp. Nobody knew his location. He reached for his phone. No signal. He grabbed his flashlight and waited. The voice didn't speak again. The light disappeared. Eventually, Michael fell asleep from exhaustion. When he woke up, the sun was already rising. He immediately checked outside. There were no footprints, no signs anyone had been there. Nothing. He packed his things and decided to leave. While walking back, he noticed something strange. A small object hanging from a tree branch. A piece of metal. He walked closer. It was an old camping lantern, completely rusted, covered in dirt. It looked like it had been there for years. Michael took a picture and continued. When he returned home, he searched online about the area. He wanted to know if anyone else had experienced something similar. That's when he found old posts from hikers. Several people described seeing strange lights in the same forest, always at night, always between the trees. But the details that disturbed Michael were the dates. Some reports were recent, others were from decades earlier. The same lights, the same location. The same strange voices. Michael contacted a local hiking group. He asked if there were abandoned cabins or old campsites in that area. One person replied with a story. Years ago, there was a small hunting cabin deep in the forest. A man who lived there used to guide hikers through the area. One winter, he disappeared. Search teams looked for him for weeks. They found his cabin. They found his equipment, but they never found him. According to the story, the last person who saw him said he was carrying a lantern into the woods late at night, and he never returned. Michael thought the story was interesting, but he still believed there was probably a normal explanation, until he looked again at the picture he took of the old lantern. Something in the background caught his attention. Behind the lantern, between the trees, was a figure. Too far away to identify, but clearly someone standing there, watching. Michael zoomed in. The image became blurry. The figure disappeared into the darkness. But there was one detail he couldn't ignore. The person appeared to be holding something. A lantern. The same type of lantern he found hanging from the tree. Michael never went back to that forest. He still enjoys hiking. He still spends time outdoors. But he refuses to camp alone, because he believes something is waiting in those woods. Something that has been there for a very long time. And the question that still bothers him is, if the man carrying the lantern disappeared decades ago, who was holding the light the night Michael saw it?